Good morning, all. Myself Chandra, and in today's session, we are going to discuss about the connectors, and we will mainly discuss about HTTP listener connector and HTTP requester connector. So by default, Mulesoft has provided various connectors to connect with external systems or applications to perform the basic operations, like to connect with Salesforce or to connect with a file location or to connect with a database. So likewise, we have multiple connectors that are defaultly provided by Mulesoft. So to start the session, so first of all, let us understand the connection. What is meant by connection? So a connection means it is a path. So whenever we want to connect two points, so we need a path, and we are going to create that path by using a connector within the Mulesoft. So here we are going to connect source and target or destination points by using a connector. And connectors will work as a source endpoint whenever we are going to add the component at the start of the flow. And it is going to trigger the message or event, and it will propagate through the flow. And we can even use the connector as a message processor, which will be configured in between the flow and to perform the operation or the activity. And we can configure the connector as a target endpoint so that it will be the final message processed within the flow. And after that, we won't need any action to be performed so that we can configure it as a target endpoint. And for example, it might be a message processor in between the flow or a final message processor in the flow. We can still able to connect to that required application or system, and we can still publish or retrieve the data from that particular target system. And let us discuss about our suppliers API that we have created till now. And within this, we will observe the flows. So come to Anypoint Studio to our Mars workspace. And within this, open the suppliers API XML. And here we have suppliers API flow. If we observe, there are two separations, like one is left to the vertical separation of dashes and another message process right of the vertical dashes. So the component that is left to this vertical dashes is called as a source or a listener. And here we are using the HTTP listener as a source endpoint, so that we are going to listen for a request on this endpoint or on this host and also the port number. And whenever we receive a request on this particular host port and also the resource name, then this particular flow will be triggered, and it will send and it is going to send that event, and it will propagate through the flow through all the message process that are configured within the flow. Likewise, we are configuring the HTTP listener. And all the services that we are building by using HTTP listener are REST APIs. So we have built so many REST APIs. We have created and tested them by using Postman. So whenever we are testing it from Postman, that means we are using the configurations like what will be the, let me check our previous sessions resources. So here we have HTTP protocol, and there is the host name and the port number and also the resource name. So on this resource, we are going to send a request with this particular method, post method, and we also need to send a payload body. So whenever we are sending this kind of information to this service, it is going to perform some operations within that service, and it is returning a response. And we might need to send additional information of the metadata for the service, like we might need to send the information in headers, or we might need to send the information in query parameters or the URL parameters. So that we will call it as the metadata. This payload body, it will be the business data or business content of the operation that is needed. So what do we have? Within the REST service, we have method, protocol, host, port, and resource. And also I'm naming it as HTTP method. And then we need to send payload or body. And we need to send the headers information. It is optional, but based on the service that we are going to test or we are going to consume, accordingly, we need to send all this information. We might need to send query parameters and also URI parameters. And we have seen this and observe the information how we can send using the Postman service. And today we are going to consume this REST service from our Mulesoft flows, and we are going to send all these informations from our Mulesoft service to the external service or third party REST service. So here I have drafted the employee service, which is already hosted on so and so server, and it is going to return a list of employees information from this service. For example, we need to send an information to this service. It is going to accept a get method, and this is our API host name or DNS name, and we can configure the port number as 80. And here we need to provide the resource name. Likewise, we have a get employees resource or service, and another service is we have choice service, which will send an information and also get the response. And we have one more service which will get the particular or employee information based on the employee ID. So we have three services, and we are going to consume these three services in our Mulesoft flow. For this, what we need, whenever we want to consume any of the service or any of the API which is not developed by our Mulesoft developers. So whenever we want to consume any of the API or any of the service, then we need to know to which server we have to connect and what are the resources information, what methods it can access, and what will be the request format that we have to set, and what will be the response that we will get out of that service. And we also need to know what are the query parameters that it will accept and what will be the headers information we can send. Likewise, we need all the list of resource details or service details before we even implement the consumption of that particular service. So we have to ask questions whenever the requirement has been given. So asking questions is not a sin, and we need to ask questions. Then only there will be understanding that these people are working on so and so service, and that's why people are asking questions, and we need to answer those questions. So even though you are having a silly questions also, it is not going to be a problem. You can ask those questions. So in our first use case, we are going to consume the get employees resource. So response is going to come in this format. It will contain the employees ID, name, department number, and also the salary information. But from our service that we are going to implement, we need to expose the response in different format. For example, we are receiving only this employee list of employees as an array, but we need to provide a response with the object format, and it is going to contain the employees as a key, and within that it is going to contain the list of employee details. And this object information also, if we observe, it is different from the input or response that we are receiving from the service. So here we are receiving empId, but instead of empId, we need to map this particular empId response to a emp number, and we need to provide the service as a connectors API. So in our connectors API, we are going to implement this. I'm going into Anypoint Studio, and from Anypoint Studio, we are going to create new project. So click on the file, new, and then Mule project. Here, define the API name as connectors API. And here I'm going to refactor this, and I will name it as HTTP operations. So I have renamed the XML file HTTP requester operations, and within this XML flow, I am going to build a flow. Drag and drop a flow. Add an HTTP listener. Add an HTTP listener. So this is our source and this is our process. So in our source, create a HTTP listener configuration. So this is going to run on our host 00, which means we can run on local host as well as we can deploy it to the server, Cloud Hub server. And it is going to run on port 8081 and provide the base path. If we want to provide a base path, common base path to the all the listener endpoints or the resources, we can provide this. So I'm going to name it as API and then click on OK and provide the path as EMP. So we are going to provide or expose the service on 8081 port with the resource name EMP, and it is going to provide employees information. Mention this as get instead of get employees. And go to advanced tab and mention the method as get method. And drag and drop a component, logger component. And here provide the values, attributes information. It will be our metadata. For example, metadata. So metadata we will receive in the attributes keyword. And then since we need to consume an HTTP service, REST service, we have to use HTTP requester component. So search for HTTP and add a HTTP request component in the flow. And for this HTTP request also, we have to create a configuration so that if we want to consume different resources from the same API, we can use this connector configuration, which is going to be created as a global element. So here, this will be our employee HTTP service configuration. And then if there is any base path for this service also, we can provide here. Right now, I'm leaving it blank. And then in the protocol, we want to consume a HTTP service. So I'm going to provide the value as HTTP. If we want to consume HTTPS service, then we need to provide the value as HTTPS. And here, provide the host name. Go to our service details. From this service, copy this name. This will be our DNS name or the host name. And then in port, you can mention 80, or by default, if you are not providing any value, then it will accept the value as 80. And here, if you observe, we are having use persistent connection. It is checked so that it is going to store the connections and it will wait for a next request and it is going to reuse the connection. If we are uncheck, if we are going to uncheck this use persistent connection, then the connection for each request is going to be created and closed. So it is not going to be maintained in the Mulesoft store. And here we are mentioning the maximum connection. If we define it as -1, that means it is unlimited connection. And ideal timeout for the connection timeout, it will be in milliseconds. 30,000 milliseconds means it is going to be a 30 seconds. And if we wanted to configure any TLS configuration, so we will understand what is TLS. So basically TLS means it is a trust store and key store configurations. Like there will be certificates which will be provided by the service, and those service configuration we have to provide here. What will be the password and what is the algorithm, and from where we have to refer the file. If we want to configure a key store information, we need to provide the JK details, Java key store details, and we have to provide the key password and password details. In our case, since it is a HTTP service, we are not configuring any TLS configuration. And if the service is needed any authentication details, then you can mention the authentication as well. Likewise, if there is any username and password, we have to provide the service, then we need to provide it here. Use none. And there is one more property like use reconnection. So whenever we mention use reconnection, then it is going to make use of the default strategy, like for how many times it has to retry and what is the interval that it can retry. We are mentioning 2 times. It can retry for 2 times with a time difference of 2 seconds if there is any connection failure. This is our standard reconnection. And then we are going to check another property. So for the entire connection, if we wanted to provide the response timeout, for example, if the service needs to give a response within the particular time, then we can configure the response timeout. For example, I'm going to configure it to 10,000. That means the response from the employee REST service needs to be returned within the 10 seconds. Otherwise, this is going to throw an exception like timeout exception. Click on OK. And here provide the resource name. So our resource name is employees. And we need to provide the HTTP method. Our HTTP method is get only. And for HTTP get methods, even though we are configuring the payload in the body, this payload body will not be sent to that service. And in advanced format, you can configure the reconnection strategy as well for this particular service, for this particular resource. I mean to say that we have configured the connector configuration. So this connector configuration, reconnection strategy, and the response timeout will be varied if we are going to configure it at the component or resource level. In our advanced tab, if we are going to configure the reconnection strategy, then it is going to override the reconnection strategy that has configured on the connector configuration of HTTP requester. I'm going to remove it. So I want to use the same reconnection strategy of the HTTP requester configuration. So here you can mention that we don't want to send this body, never. In this way, we can make sure that we are not sending the payload body in the body section. And we are making sure that we are not sending the request send body mode as never. And if we want to send any streaming request, then we need to enable this is to always, or you can make sure it can be if we want to send the request in a streaming mode, then you can use the always. And another thing is that likewise, we were sending the information in Postman like headers information or query parameters and also URI parameters. Within the HTTP requester component also, we have different sections to configure all the details. So here you can click on this headers tab and we need to provide the key and value names of that particular header value. Likewise, we can configure multiple key value pairs within the headers, and within the query parameters also we can configure this keys and values. And if we want to configure any URI parameter, we need to make sure that we are going to provide that as flower braces or curly braces after the resource name and then after the /. Here we need to mention emp number. For example, there is an employee service and we need to pass this emp number as a URI parameter. So to configure this URI parameter, go to URI parameters tab, click on plus icon. So our parameter name will be emp number and value we can output the value, or if you want to configure it from any variable, you can mention it by using vars.emp num. Or if you want to get this information from attributes information or payload, you can even access that within the values information. So I'm going to remove this headers, URI parameters, everything. And then I'm going to save the changes. Let us deploy the application and test the service. Application is deployed. Let us go to Postman. So from Postman, we can send a request, HTTP localhost, and our resource name is emp. Send a request. So we are getting a response. There is no listener for endpoint emp. Let us check from the logs. Yeah. Since we have configured the request, since we have configured the HTTP listener configuration with base path in the connectors configuration as API, we need to mention this in the resource name as well. So our first resource name will be /API, and then after that we have to provide the particular resource name of the service. Send request. Don't say. And 1 second. We are getting a response with error like illegal character in path index, and it is having emp number. Okay. Let us click on OK and go to message flow and click on the HTTP requester component. Remember, we have removed the URI parameters value. So it is unable to send the request to this particular service, which is having an URI parameter without value. So let us remove that and redeploy the changes. Send one more request from Postman. Now we are receiving the response. So this response is received from the employees REST API service, which is a third-party service. And we want to transform this response into a different format as given in the requirement. So it was said that we are going to receive the list of employee service and we are getting those employees details. And this list of employees details, we need to convert into a different format within our connectors API service of the get employee details. So we have to create a structure of these fields of the array as a response from the service. And also we need to create the required format structure in JSON format for these particular fields and values as a connectors API response. So I'm going to stop the service. And now let us create the required formats in JSON structure. So here we have the REST API employee list service response, and this is our connectors API response. So I'm going to store these two details in the resources folder of connectors API service. Save the files into your folder structure to the desktop, and then copy the files from the desktop to the folder, resources folder. Here we have the REST API employees list as well as connectors API response. And within our flow, we need to transform the response that is received from the employees third-party service. So we can use transform message component to transform the formats and the field structures. Drag and drop the transform message. And within this transform message, let us define the metadata for the input. So in the input section, click on define metadata and click on add. So this will be our REST API response, employees response. And here, select the file type as JSON, select example. And we need to select that file from our resources folder, REST API employee list. Click on select. So this will be our input to this transform message, which is going to be received or written from the third party service. And we are going to create output metadata. Click on output metadata and then create a type, connectors employees response. For this connectors employees response also, we want to select the type as JSON. Instead of schema, select example and select the file from the resources. Click on select. So here we have the input and output metadata. Let us map the details. So we want the employee ID to be mapped to EMP number and name to EMP name, and department to department number, salary to salary. And you can even directly write the script within the data view if you are familiar and good in writing the script. So you don't have to map these values. Instead of payload 1, I'm going to name this record as EMP. So that very meaningful. Here I need to use EMP. So replace the payload 01 to EMP. And here, if we want to know the index of the record, we need to use the index of EMP, like position. I am mentioning position. So position in the array will start with 0. So instead of 0, I want to increase that value to 1. So for the first record, it will be 1, and then the record value will be incremental by 1 for each index. Save the changes and redeploy. Application is deployed. Let us test from the postman. Observe the difference. Here we have directly an array of records with empId, and I'm going to send a request. Once the application is deployed, test from the postman. Send a request. Now we can see that instead of empId, we are getting emp number, and the list is returned as an object format, which is containing the employee's key, and it is having a list of objects or array of objects information. Likewise, we can provide the employees details, which we are going to internally consume from other third-party employee service and providing the details to a system A application. For example, we have a third-party service which is running on application B, and we want to expose that information to application A. So we are building an integration in the Mulesoft layer and consuming the REST service and providing the information or employees details in the required format that are needed for the application A. Because in application B, we have a different format of the employees information, but application A want in a different format, so that we are building a service and we are returning a response in a canonical format that can be used across the applications within the architecture or other organization. So the same service can be used by multiple applications within the organization. Now, let us go in detail about the service that we have. I'm going to close this file. And here we have a query parameter, department number, which is optional. That means even though if we are not sending the department number to this service, we still get the response. But let us try to configure the department number and send the request to the third-party service. So for that, let us clear the logs and add a variable. I'm going to add a variable as dept number. So I want to get this information from this connected API get employee service. So I want this information from either headers or it can be defined as a query parameters within the connected service. So for now, I'm going to use query parameters only and add the values department number. If we observe here, we are going to receive the information query parameters dept number and assigning to a dept number variable. And then we are going to send this value or variable information to this employee service. So here within the service, go to query parameters tab and click on plus icon. So our query parameter name to this service will be dept num, which is already provided by the service. And the value that we want to send to the service will be vars.dept number, which is defined in our previous step. Save the changes. So we need to make sure that we are going to store these attributes or metadata information before making any call to any external service. Like it can be a third party REST service, or there may be a file connector, or it can be a database connector. So we need to store that information before making a call. Otherwise, these attributes information will be modified after or post the completion of third party call. So we won't be able to get the same information after completion of this HTTP requester in this case. So for that, we'll do one thing. I'm going to add one logger and then print the attributes information here. Post HTTP request call attributes. So we have information with the attributes before the request and after the request. We will observe both the logs. Application is redeployed. Test it from Postman. So from Postman, as of now, we are not sending any query parameter. So send a request and we should successfully get the response, even though we are not sending a query parameter, and observe the logs. So our metadata is having an HTTP request attributes and it has request path and what is the method that is exposed by the connectors API and what is the listener path and on which IP address and port number it is listed. We can check that what are the query string and the relative path, all this information within this attributes. And let us check what is the headers information that we have received. So by default, we have received the Postman token from where this request has been sent and what is the user agent and this kind of information. And in query parameters, we have empty array list and URI parameters also, it is an empty array list. And let us check the values after the HTTP requester. So post HTTP call attributes are HTTP response attributes. So the before logger was printing HTTP request attributes because we have a listener. And after the call that we have made to the HTTP request service, we are going to get a response from that service. So it is going to return an HTTP response attributes information. And it will contain what is the status code of the particular service, whether the success or it is a failure. And if there are any headers information that is going to be written from that service, we can see that in the response headers. All these kind of information will be written from the third party or HTTP requester. Hence, we need to make sure that we have to store this information if we need to use this later in the process of the flow. Create the console and send a request using a query parameter. So add a query parameter value at the end of the service and value is department number. We have 10, 50, 30. So I'm going to send an information 30. Send a request. So whenever we are sending the value in dept number query parameter to this connectors API, this service internally is going to read that value from the query parameters and assigning it to a dept number variable. And that value is sending it to the third party. The party service is going to accept the query parameter key name of deptNo. But our connectors API is having a query parameter of dept number. And that value we are assigning it to dept num of the third party service. In this way, even though it is having a different key names between the services, we can make sure that we are going to send that information to the required fields of the service. I'm going to stop the service. Let us discuss about the second use case. So in our second use case, we have the service details like host name and also the service name or resource name. And then after that, we have a URI parameters. So whenever we are mentioning that within the flower braces, that means we need to send a value with the employee number details. So it is going to be like 101 or 102. This kind of information we have to send. I'm going to Endpoint Studio and then add a new flow for this service. Get employee detail flow. I'm going to rename this to EMP. Get employees details flow. But our new service is going to return only get employee details, only one employee information. Add an HTTP listener. And we are going to use the existing connector configuration for HTTP listener and add a path as EMP. And here we are going to mention it as EMP number. So for our connector service, we are going to receive the value of URI within the URI parameter EMP number. And then we are going to send this information to the third party service. Logger. Metadata, attributes, and then HTTP request. So here for HTTP request, we have already created the employees HTTP service request configuration. So we can use the same configuration here. And we have to mention the HTTP method and the resource name of that particular service. So here our resource name is like employees empId. Copy this and then configure it here. So whenever we are going to add the values as a flower basis, we have to define that value in the URI parameters. So go to URI parameters and add a key. Key name will be empId and value. So value, we are going to get this information from attributes. Attributes dot URI params dot emp number. Because this emp number is defined within our connector service. Let us check that. So on our listener, we have this emp number. So this emp number we are going to send to the request. Remember that we need to either store that information or we can directly use this information. If there are no third-party service calls or external connector calls before using this attributes information. If there is any attributes that are needed, we can store it and we can refer with the variables information as well. And deploy the changes and we will check. Run the project. Paste from Postman. So our new service will be EMP, and then after that we need to provide a value 101, for example. Send a request. So whenever we are sending this information, we can observe that we are getting a single employee information. But this employee information is having a response format returning from the third party service. So we have to modify this information according to the new requirements. So I'm going to source resources, and here I'm going to copy paste the existing information JSON files. So it will be REST API employee response. So it is having single employee response. And our connectors API response also, we are going to provide it. So instead of list response, it will be a Connectors API employee response. Let us open both these files. So instead of having employees, let us add employee details. And within this employee details, instead of an array, we want to produce a object information. Save the changes. And then let us modify the employee response of REST API. So this employee response from the API is going to be an object. So make the changes accordingly and then save it. Now within our get employee details flow, add a transfer message. And here you can define the metadata, or if you are familiar, you can directly write the code. So I'm going to do one thing. We know that there is a response like empId and name. So our payload is going to be like this payload. And then we want the information to be written in the employee details as a main key. So let us add this information. It is employee details. And employee details again containing the object information. So that object information will be the values like this. So here, instead of the direct values, we need to provide the information from the response. So add a mapping payload dot empId. So this empId is the field of response. And the next value will be payload dot name. Payload dot name and payload dot dept. And the last mapping will be payload dot salary. So we can do in either way. We can define this metadata and we can do the mapping. Otherwise, we can directly write the transformation within by using the transform message script. Save the changes. Send a request to the service. Now we can see the data response in the required format that is needed for the application A. And it is having employee details and having the fields information. Now, for example, we are going to send some employee which is not available. So I'm sending this 200. Whenever I'm going to send this 200 as a URI parameter, I'm still getting the response with employee details, but with the values of null, which means the service is not returning the employee details from the third party service. So in that case, we need to make sure that to return a response with no employee information found. So this is even applicable for the employees details whenever we are passing a department number that is not part of that list. So let us pass a department number 100. So in our get employee service, whenever we are passing the department number 100, we don't have a employees details related to department 100, and that is why it is returning employees response as empty array. So in both these scenarios, we are going to handle this situation and throw a or return a response with invalid or no data found. So within this, I'm going to add if is empty, I'm going to check entire response. So if the payload is empty, then I want to return a message, and it is going to return a response like no employee details found. Else we are going to return the employee reserve. And we wanted to send this employee number which was sent to our request. So for that, we need to store that variable information because we have sent a request to the third party service or HTTP request, external component or external connection is there in between the process. So we are going to lose that attributes information. So I'm going to use a set variable. And within the set variable, I'm going to store the EMP number. This EMP number I'm going to retrieve from the attributes URI params dot EMP number. So here no employee details found for. I'm going to concatenate the value. If this value is invalid, then you can even throw an error like employee number is null like that. So in our case, I'm going to leave it blank. And in our second scenario, we are going to check if is empty. So is empty will work even it is an array or object. If there is no information, it is going to evaluate to true. Message. No employees details found for department. This is going to be department number. Else we need to return the response. And here we can check one more condition like whenever this department number is available, then only we want to perform this condition. Otherwise, we want to return a different message. So in that case, if it is empty and if vars dot department number is null, for that check the condition is blank. So if the value itself is blank from the request, then we want to return a response like no employees details found. And we don't want to return this department number. And here else condition, and in else, because this department number is available, I am going to return the message with no employee details found for department and the department number. Save the changes. Once the application is deployed, then we will test it again. Go to Postman, and here we are going to send a request with the department number 100 for the get employee service. Now, if we observe, we are getting a response, no employee details found for department 100. Let us send the department number as 10. So whenever we're sending the department number 10, and since there are employee details for that particular department, we are receiving the correct result and as expected. I'm going to remove this department number. We are not sending the department number value. Then we need to return or receive all the employee details irrespective of the department number. Let us test the get employee details service. So this service, we can mention the employee number 101, which is available. So that information we can check from the get employees details because there is an employee number with 101. We can send that as a URI parameter for the get employee details service. So we can get the employee details as a single employee's information. Now let us try to send a 1001 as a URI parameter to this service. Whenever we are sending this information 1001, we can see that no employee details for 1001. And if we want to add or enhance this message like employee details found for EMP number, you can still add that. So I'm going to add that information in the get employee service for EMP number for employee 101. Now we are going to move to next use case. So in our next use case, we have a service. Let us see. Yeah, there is a post service where we have to send the information to the service and also we have to get the response. So let us see the details. So this post service of the choice resource is going to accept the query parameters and also accept the headers values. And it is going to accept the request payload with this information. Like there will be a key and the value can be anything. So let us try to implement this service in our connectors API. I am going to create a flow. And this flow name, we are going to name it as choice requester operations. It is fine. And then add a listener. And within this service, we are going to name it as instead of choice. So choice is already the resource name of the third party. So instead of choice, make our connectors API name or a resource name as service that we are going to consume as channel. And then add a logger. So here logger, we are going to name the metadata. It is going to be having attributes information. And after that, we are going to consume the HTTP requester. So in HTTP requester, we can use the same configuration because it is going to consume the same service. And resource name will be different. So resource name is choice that we can check from the service detail. And here we can configure the query parameters which are optional. So configure the query parameters. Query parameter name and the value. So this value, we want to get the information from our connectors API as part of the headers. So attributes dot headers dot tech. So we want to accept this information as a tech. And the next value, channel. And I am going to receive this information as part of the attributes headers only. Dot headers dot channel. So channel information will be received on the same header. So for the connectors API, this will be our input request headers or metadata information, and we are going to map this information to the third-party service query parameters or headers information. So let us check this. Yeah. So instead of configuring this in the query parameters, remove it from here and add into the headers. So here, add the details, channel, and we want to get this information, attributes, headers, channel. So this way, we have seen that we have configured headers, query parameters, and URI parameters. Since this is going to be a post service, we also need to send the payload information. So I'm going to accept only post method for this channel service on the connectors API. And also I have to configure the payload that is needed for this requester, third party service. For example, we want to configure the driving license information. So this will be our key to the service, and value we are going to send to the connectors API service. So this information we are just sending the license. So irrespective of the input information that we are receiving, we are going to get that information and mapping that information as a payload and sending that to a requester. So if we observe here we are having a body and configured with payload keyword. If we want to perform any transformation within this section also, you can directly perform the transformation. So we have data view expression here. And after the service is returned some response, just add a transform message. And within the transform message, I'm going to get the response in the format of message. So this service is mentioning that it is going to return the response as string format or text format. But instead of string or text format, in our connectors API, we want that information to be written JSON format. So adding the structure here, message, and add a payload that is written as a response. Add a application JSON output, save the changes. I am going to send a request. So yeah, let us test this service as well, because we have made one change, like no employee details found for employee number has to come. Yeah, we can see that response, and send only 102. We have to see the employee details. Now we can check the channel service channel, and is going to accept a payload and post method, but try to send a request with get method. So it is not going to allow that method. So change the method to post and send this information. But whenever we are sending this information, we have some issue, like it is not able to read the value of payload.license number because we are not sending any information in the body. So let us try to send the JSON request. We have mentioned that we are going to send an information in the license number. So AP 10343. Send a request. And here we are getting some error from the third-party service. So HTTP get on resource for this service is not allowed. So we have to check our configuration within the service. Go to HTTP requester, and we see here HTTP method is configured as get. So instead of get, configure it as post, and then redeploy the changes. Send a request. Internal server error. Is sending a request with the default port, fine, but it is having headers.text. Send one more request. Is still failing. So instead of this, let us try to consume this service directly from the postman. I am sending a request. Method not allowed. Post. add a request here. Instead of text, it should be JSON. We are receiving the response without sending any headers or query parameters. So we should also receive the response in the service. So let us try to verify the values. We have this driving license. Yeah, instead of Java, we need to send a payload as JSON. If there is any error, try to check each and every component before that request was made. So in our case, we were unable to send the request and we are getting a HTTP internal server error. So in our case, we were not sending a Java request instead of JSON request and our JSON payload, and we are getting an error. So we have made that change, and let us test from the Postman again. Now, if we observe, we are receiving a response, and this will be the response from the third-party service, and we are converting to a JSON format. We can check this service. And if we have any doubts, like what is the raw content that is coming from the service, you can still use this raw tab and check the service. And let us try to add other details. So in our service, it was mentioned that we can even send the query parameters technology and channel. And within our connectors API, we are providing the values within the headers, and headers is going to be technology, and technology value can be Mulesoft. For example, I'm going to send this information. Now we can see that we are receiving a response from Mulesoft from the service and converting it to the JSON format. Let us try to add this to a different value. Response from RTB, and we will add one more header value and we'll observe the result. So whenever we are sending the combination of requests to the service, we can see different response from the third party service, and we are able to provide and transform it to a different structure from our connected API service. So this way we can expose or consume the service which is running on a different technology, or which is the REST API within Mulesoft, and we can expose it as a REST service from the Mulesoft, and we can have a canonical format or a required format that is going to be used within the organization architecture in multiple applications. So this is about the connectors. So in this way, we can consume other REST services or whatever the services that are developed as a REST services, even within the Mulesoft also, we can consume by using the HTTP requester component, and we can create a common configuration if we are going to consume multiple resources from the same service. Please like, share, and subscribe.